looks at Alan Wake 2 still not making royalties. First time I've seen role playing appear in one of these questions. But let's crack on with the question. If this incredible game is not profitable after almost a year, how can any investor group take any reasonable bet on a $100 million game that isn't a live service money printer or an established and beloved franchise? I'd love to see more lower budget risks on original IP from major publishers, but the market at that level is also extremely saturated and tough to cut through. What is a major studio to do, Oliver?
Oof. I mean, first of all, live service is very risky. If you're talking about making $100 million bet on a new title, obviously we've seen that with Concord recently and other titles. I think Alan Wake 2, it's a bit tricky because Alan Wake 2 is a sequel and arguably a less marketable sequel than the first game, which, from my understanding, was not a gigantic commercial success to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's not a gigantic
It was a risk,
surprise.
I think, Alan Wake 2. Ultimately.
Yeah, it was a risk. It's not a gigantic surprise it didn't sell like 10 million copies, but at the same time, it is a great game, and it's unfortunate it has not sold enough to apparently clear its considerable
It probably
expenses.
will, I think, in the fullness of time.
In the fullness of time, yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's only been out. It has a long tail, and it's only been out for, 10 months at this point?
Yep.
Maybe 11 months, because it came out in October. So not an eternity in terms of game sales. But I do think that Remedy has a certain style of game design and development that might not mesh super well with commercial expectations. Like if you look at Quantum Break, Alan Wake, Crossfire X's single player component, famously, which I took a look at back in the day, which you can no longer play, unfortunately. Some of those were more modest successes, but none were big hits. You know, if they had been, perhaps we'd be talking about Quantum Break 3 right now instead of Alan Wake 2. I think Control has been more successful, but I think there is some danger with that in its upcoming sequel, because Control is a very low budget game, and if you do increase that budget even to something like Alan Wake 2 levels, you know, all of a sudden the commercial expectations become higher in a concurrent way with that, right? So you need to be careful with that stuff. So yeah, I think Alan Wake 2 is just it was a tough sell from the beginning. It's obviously something that was very surprising when they announced it, that it was even going to be a project. Certainly a very exciting game, certainly a very well executed game, but a kind of game where you could kind of see it was probably not going to be the greatest of commercial successes from the outset.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. John, thoughts?
Yeah, I think they also kind of made their own bed there a little bit. So obviously Epic was the publisher and they obviously funded it. So I understand why, but I think not being on Steam was a huge problem. And I think not having day one physical versions was another huge problem. And I think those two things together probably killed a lot of those potentially initial sales they could have had. Right? Like, first, I know a lot of people that did not buy it because it wasn't on disc right away. And then by the time they finally get that version, it almost feels like too little too late. You know what I mean? Like they've missed the buzz cycle. And in addition, the Epic Game Store just isn't like, it's a Fortnite portal for a lot of people still. And I just don't think you get that kind of sales. I think being on Steam would have made a gigantic difference for them. Yeah. And those two factors right there probably had a pretty nasty impact on their success.
Yeah, that's really tricky because it's difficult to underestimate the kind of hatred there is for the Epic Game Store amongst a certain subsection of the PC audience. But at the same time, they did fund the game effectively, as I understand it. So it's definitely a tricky situation there, right?
So, I mean, if they wanted to make that money back as a publisher, you'd think they would just go ahead and do Steam as well. But I guess it's more important to them to keep it as an Epic Games exclusive thing, even if it ends up hurting the success of the game itself.
Yeah, they've cut new deals recently. Is it Annapurna for Control 2? So, you know, clearly Remedy are looking to sort of change up the situation with future development. But at the same time, you look at Control, which by all accounts was an outrageously great success for Remedy. You know, not to sort of awesome degrees, but certainly a very comfortably profitable game. And I think there's probably still more to come from the original Control. Surely we've got to see a Nintendo Switch 2 version. But yeah, that's kind of the way things work out. I'd love to see, just going back to Bjork Drive's question here, I'd love to see more lower budget risks on original IP from major publishers. I guess we should see that, right? But, you know, it's
Astrobot.
Really... Yeah, I guess that's a pretty interesting example, but that's still, you know, a substantial... I don't think it's Was it a lower budget Risk? I guess so.
I don't know.
Not an original IP though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What can I say? I think there is obviously routes forward. Control has proved it. Let's see what Remedy comes up with next with Control 2 and its other titles. Alan Wake 2, though, I suspect it will probably be fine in the long term, just as Control was.